The 20th of November, 1944. Submerged off the coast of Ulithi Atoll, Caroline Islands. The air inside the Imperial Japanese Navy submarine I-47 is thick, heavy with the stench of diesel oil, unwashed bodies, and a suffocating, palpable tension. We are deep beneath the surface of the Pacific, hovering in the silent blackness just outside the massive American anchorage. But the true horror isn't in the submarine itself. It is strapped to the deck outside, exposed to the crushing pressure of the ocean. 4 metal cylinders sit clamped to the hull of the I-47. They look like swollen, deformed torpedoes, but they are something far more sinister. These are the Kiten Type 1. The name translates poetically to return to heaven, promising to turn the tide of the war. But to the men inside the sub, looking at the schematics, the engineering truth is far grimmer. These are not just weapons. They are manned, one-way delivery systems. Lieutenant Junior Grade Sekio Nishina stands ready. He is not just a pilot, he is the co-inventor of this nightmare. He carries a small white box, the ashes of his partner, Lieutenant Kuroki, who died suffocated during a training accident in a prototype just months earlier. That was the first warning sign of the Kiten's unforgiving nature. The machine does not discriminate between friend and foe. It simply consumes life. The order comes. It is time to board. Unlike the Kamikaze pilots in the sky who can see the horizon, the Kiten pilot must crawl through a narrow, damp access tube connecting the mother submarine to the weapon's belly. Nishina drags himself through the steel sphincter. The transition is absolute. He lowers himself into the cockpit of the Kiten. The space is claustrophobic beyond imagination. The cockpit is barely a meter in diameter. It is a tangle of valves, levers, and a periscope eyepiece that presses hard against the face. The smell here is different. It smells of cold steel, grease, and the pure oxygen used to fuel the massive Type 93 torpedo engine that powers this suicide craft. As Nishina settles into the small seat, he checks the devastating payload just inches in front of his knees, a 1.55-ton warhead. This is enough high explosive to snap a battleship's keel in half. From inside the mother sub, the crew seals the hatch. The sound of the metal clanking shut is final. There is no handle on the inside. There is no ejection system. Once those clamps are tightened, the pilot is biologically fused with the machine. He is no longer a man. He is the guidance system for a 14-meter-long torpedo. Inside the I-47, the telephone line connecting the sub to the Kiten crackles. Nishina's voice is calm, terrifyingly so. He reports his instruments are green. The clamps holding the Kiten to the mother sub are released. With a shuddering lurch, the weapon drops away from the I-47. The engine roars to life, a deafening, high-pitched whine of the radial engine spinning up to 30 knots. Nishina is now alone in the Pacific Ocean, navigating through murky water, hunting for the shadows of American hulls, racing toward his own inevitable disintegration. 1944. Kure Naval Arsenal, Hiroshima Prefecture. To understand the nightmare Sekio Nishina is experiencing in the dark waters of Ulithi, we must look at the anatomy of the beast he is riding. The Kiten was not designed from scratch. It was a desperate mutation of the Imperial Navy's most effective weapon, the Type 93 long-lance torpedo. The Type 93 was a marvel of engineering. Unlike Western torpedoes that ran on compressed air, leaving a visible trail of bubbles on the surface for ships to dodge, the Type 93 was fueled by pure, compressed oxygen. It was fast, long-range, and virtually invisible in the water. It was the perfect assassin. But when engineers cut a Type 93 inches half and inserted a small pilot compartment between the warhead and the engine, they created a death trap. Inside the cockpit, the pilot sits directly forward of the combustion chamber. As the engine screams at 3,000 revolutions per minute, the heat becomes unbearable. Temperatures inside the steel tube can rapidly rise to over 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The pilot is sweating profusely, his hands slipping on the control wheel, condensation dripping from the cold steel walls onto his fevered skin. But the heat is the least of his worries. The oxygen engine is chemically unstable. A single leak in the fuel lines turns the cockpit into a bomb. Furthermore, the exhaust system is notoriously difficult to manage. If the pilot fails to adjust the trim perfectly, exhaust gases can vent back into the cockpit. Many pilots in training didn't die from impact. They simply fell asleep, poisoned by carbon monoxide, and drifted to the bottom of the ocean to suffocate in the dark. Navigating this steel coffin is a feat of impossible multitasking. The pilot has a small periscope, but he cannot leave it up. If the periscope breaks the surface for more than 3 seconds, American destroyers will spot the feather of water and rain down depth charges. So, the pilot must memorize the target's location, submerge, count the seconds in his head while calculating speed, depth, and drift, and then pop up blindly for a split-second correction. It is a calculus of death performed while sitting on 1.5 tons of explosives, struggling to breathe. At the secret training base on Otsushima Island, the reality of the program was grim. Young men, barely out of their teens, were given white headbands and short swords, tanto. They were told their sacrifice would save the empire. But they saw the truth during practice runs. The training models had a theoretical escape hatch. But in the combat models, the Type 1, this was a cruel joke. Even if a pilot wanted to abort, the hatch could not be opened from the inside due to the immense water pressure against the hull. Once the submarine crew tightened those bolts on the outside, the pilot's fate was sealed. He was merely a biological component of the torpedo, a soft brain wired into a hard shell, destined to be vaporized. Back at Ulithi, Nishina is now minutes away from his target. The air in his capsule is fouling, the adrenaline is fading, replaced by the cold, mechanical procedure of the final run. He is not fighting a samurai's duel. He is solving a geometry problem where the final variable is his own existence. The 20th of November, 1944, 5:47 a.m., Ulithi Anchorage. The silence of the dawn is shattered not by a scream, but by a seismic concussion. Inside the anchorage, the fleet oiler USS Mississinawa AO-59 suddenly erupts. A column of fire and black smoke punches thousands of feet into the sky. The ship, fully loaded with aviation fuel, becomes a floating volcano. Sekio Nishina, or perhaps one of his comrades, has found his mark. The warhead detonated against the starboard bow, tearing through the steel plating and igniting the volatile cargo. Within minutes, the massive ship capsizes and sinks, taking 63 American sailors with it. Back on the I-47, the crew cheers. They hear the distant thunder through the hull. To them, this is proof. The Kiten works. The divine weapon has struck, but history is cruel. The sinking of the Mississinawa would be the tragic high water mark of the entire Kiten program, a false dawn that would justify sending hundreds more young men to their deaths. Because as the smoke cleared over Ulithi, the grim reality of the weapon's limitations began to surface. The Kiten was terrifying on paper, but in practice, it was mechanically incompetent. The guidance system was the primary failure point. Once the pilot accelerated for the final attack run, the speed made the periscope useless, the vibration blurred the image, and the drag threatened to snap the tube. So, the pilot had to retract the scope and attack blindly, relying on a mental stopwatch and a compass. Imagine driving a car at 60 miles per hour, blindfolded, trying to hit a moving garage door based on a glimpse you took 30 seconds ago. Most pilots simply missed. They motored past their targets into the empty ocean until their fuel ran out. Others suffered from the cold steel defects. The Type 1 second were often built with lower-grade steel due to material shortages. Welds cracked under pressure, engines seized. Many Kiten exploded prematurely, vibrated apart, or simply sank due to ballast failures before they even saw an enemy ship. But the most haunting aspect occurred on the mother submarines. The submarine crews who launched the Kiten suffered a specific kind of psychological torture. After the launch, the sub would dive deep and wait. The hydrophone operator would put on his headset, listening intently. He wasn't just listening for enemy destroyers. He was listening for his friends. He would hear the high-pitched whine of the Kiten's propeller fading into the distance. Then, he would wait for the boom. Often, there was no boom. Or worse, there was the distinct, sickening sound of a Pistol shot, the acoustic signature of a steel pressure hull imploding as it sank below crush depth. The operator would have to take off his headset and report to the captain. Target unit. Lost. No explosion. The pilots didn't return to heaven. They were crushed into soda cans at the bottom of the Pacific, victims of their own machinery. August 1945, coastal waters of Japan. As the war drew to a close, the desperation of the Imperial Navy reached a fever pitch. The target selection shifted. No longer hunting battleships or fleet carriers in the open ocean, the Kiten were deployed to defend the Japanese coastline against the inevitable invasion. This shift in strategy introduced a new layer of horror to the pilots' experience. The weight. In the open ocean missions, pilots were launched from submarines in the heat of a hunt. But in the coastal defense strategy, Kiten were stationed at hidden shore bases or strapped to slow-moving transport ships. Pilots would sit in their cockpits, sometimes for hours, waiting for an enemy that might never come. Imagine sitting in a steel pipe, knees against your chest, surrounded by high explosives. The water around you is cold, seeping through the uninsulated hull. You are breathing pure oxygen through a mask that chafes your skin. You have a telephone headset on, listening to a controller on shore or on the mothership. You are already dead. You are just waiting for the timeline to catch up. The psychological strain broke many men before they ever pulled the starting lever. There are reports of pilots in the shore-based units banging on the inside of the hulls with wrenches, a rhythmic, metallic drumming that echoed through the water. It wasn't a code. It was frustration. It was terror. It was the sound of a human soul realizing the futility of its container, but nothing captures the tragedy more than the letters they left behind. In the Kiten Memorial Museum today, these letters are preserved. They are not the fanatical ravings of brainwashed zealots portrayed in Allied propaganda. They are heartbreakingly human. They write about the cherry blossoms in their hometowns. They ask their mothers to take care of a younger sibling. They apologize for dying before they could repay their parents' kindness. One pilot, realizing the war was lost, wrote a letter that was essentially an apology for his own sacrifice. He knew his death would not stop the American fleet. He knew the divine wind had stopped blowing. Yet, he climbed into the tube anyway. Why? Because of peer pressure, societal expectation, and the terrifying momentum of a military machine that had no brakes. The most chilling technical detail of the late-war Kiten operations was the air start valve. In the chaos of combat, communication lines often failed. Pilots strapped to a submerged submarine couldn't hear the order to launch. So, the submarine captain would signal the launch by revving the sub's engines in a specific pattern, or in some cases, a crewman would simply take a hammer and bang on the hull near the Kiten's clamps. Clang, clang, clang. That was the signal. No glory. No speech. Just a metallic vibration travelling through the water, telling a 20-year-old boy that it was time to ignite his engine and cease to exist. By August 1945, the Kiten program had become a grim assembly line of suicide. The training was shortened. The pilots were younger, less skilled. They were launching defective weapons into a sea full of American technology, radar, sonar, and proximity fuses that made the Kiten obsolete before it even left the tube. When the guns finally fell silent on the 15th of August 1945, the ledger of the Kiten program was opened. The math was devastatingly lopsided. The Imperial Navy had sacrificed over 100 young pilots in these suicide missions. Hundreds more technicians and submarine crewmen died trying to deliver them to the battlefield. And for what? In exchange for this river of blood, the Kiten confirmedly sank only 2 ships, the fleet oiler USS Mississiniwa and the destroyer escort USS Underhill. A handful of other ships were damaged, but the strategic impact on the war was statistically zero. The divine weapon failed not because the pilots lacked courage, their bravery was absolute, bordering on the supernatural, but because the premise itself was flawed. The Japanese High Command believed that spirit, seishin, could overcome physics and radar. They believed that a human being, willing to die, was a superior guidance system to a machine. They were wrong. A human being inside a torpedo is a liability. A human needs oxygen. A human feels heat. A human gets disoriented in the dark. A human can hesitate, panic, or simply pass out. By replacing a mechanical gyroscope with a biological brain, they didn't upgrade the weapon. They downgraded a man. Today, at the Kaiten Memorial Museum in Yamaguchi Prefecture, there is a stone monument. It doesn't list the ships they sank. It lists the names of the men who never came back. It stands as a silent testament to a regime that viewed its own youth as nothing more than programmable ammunition. The rusting hulks of unused Kaitens are still found occasionally by divers in the Pacific, half buried in the sand. They look like ancient sea monsters, their steel skins corroded by salt and time. But if you look closely at the hatch, you are reminded of the terrifying engineering choice that defined them. The hatch handles are on the outside. It is the ultimate symbol of the program, a weapon designed to lock the future inside a dark tube and send it to the bottom of the sea. The Kiten wasn't just a torpedo. It was a metal hearse for an empire that had lost its way.